Welcome to Making Chassidus Real, Part 8. And today I want to just digress a little bit and talk about something, because I actually do want to go back to the topic we spoke last week, which is the idea of self-care, and I had a couple of questions coming from people, so I'm going to come back to it and clarify it a bit more. But I want to just digress for a moment and talk about a different topic, which is a given, but it's important to talk about it anyway. It's important to talk about anything, all these things today, because there's such opposition sometimes from the perceptions that come from secularism and worldly thinking and so on and so forth. And the reason it's connected to everything else we were saying is because really part of building up the hashkafa, the mindset of Chassidus, is shifting from the way a human being thinks and the way Torah thinks. And the seichel anushi, the human being thought process, is limited, finite. We often think we understand things and we try to be rational, but then we come to different conclusions. Whereas if we take upon ourselves and we aspire to have the perspective of Torah vision to everything that is in our life and our mind and our experiences, then we are moving into a seichel eliki, moving into a godly perspective, which is very often different, and very often things that are hard for us to understand. We have to think about them and process them, and then hopefully it will affect the way we live. So where that starts actually is the way we approach Torah in general. And that's I want to just talk about that a little bit today, because we know that Torah is stakel ba'iraisa ubara alma. Hashem looked at the Torah and created the world. Torah is the blueprint of creation. Torah is kodma l'olam. Torah transcends the world. And therefore, lakel gomer alai, really everything in the world is established through Torah. In other words, our perspective is that Torah is balabos. Torah defines the metzius. Torah is what defines reality, not reality defining Torah. And therefore, this has to remain and in a very pure and strong way. We find in Chassidus, but especially in the Sichos and letters of the Rabbi, this incredible pshitus, simple and deep emunah in the absolute purity of Torah, transcendence of Torah, and balabatishkeit of Torah, as being the absolute truth, without mixing any worldly perspective into it whatsoever. Now, obviously this is a general Yiddishkeit approach, but we find by the Rebbe, it emphasizes and expresses itself in certain things which are, the Rebbe holds to be very dear. And I want to just mention a couple of examples which I think are so important. First of all, many times the Rebbe speaks about this, but there's a letter in Igros Kodesh, Chelek Tezvav, page Samach. The Rebbe is writing to an educator about not compromising, and he says that when we talk about not compromising in Yiddishkeit, we're not only talking about not to compromise in Shmiras HaMitzvahs. So the Rebbe's shitta obviously always was, when you makar people, there shouldn't be compromises in mitzvahs, because that's an obvious thing. But he says even compromising with regard to perspectives, deis, and even compromises when you explain things to people where in Torah it seems to contradict what modern science tells us. And sometimes we fall into a trap, says the Rebbe, that we think we have to compromise in the way we express Torah's view, because that's the way to get the youth. That's the way to influence the people. And the Rebbe says that doesn't work. That just brings a weakness, and the Rebbe is very, very against that. The Rebbe is only for really preserving the absolute purity and truth of Torah as a truth of Hashem, notwithstanding what our mind struggles with or doesn't struggle with. That's a really important perspective. An example of this is the Rebbe's absolute insistence and emphasis that the world was created in 6 days, normal days, 24-hour days, and that the world is indeed 5,783 years old. Now, we do know that there's even within the Torah world and the Frum world, different perspectives on this, and there's people that will quote from this source and that source, that because we really, there are opinions that say that the world is longer, and that the days of creation weren't kipshutoy, weren't in the literal sense, and so on and so forth. And the Rebbe is absolutely against that and brings proofs that it can't be, because it undermines the whole idea of Shabbos and so on and so forth. But what's at the crux of it? At the crux of this whole thing is, where's the starting point? In other words, if we take the approach, particularly of Chassidus and the way the Rebbe presents it, the starting point is what the Torah says is kipshutai. What the Torah says is the way it is. We have a question, scientifically it seems, mamish, that it's very hard to understand, and rationally it's very difficult to come to terms with it. Okay, so we have to change our thinking. We have to work out what the answer is, but that doesn't change the way we interpret Torah. So in other words, I had a discussion once with someone says, yes, but what's wrong in relying on an individual Rishon Shitta that it could be understood a bit differently? And I explained to him that no, it's not, of course, it's part of Torah, maybe it's a different view, but why are you looking dafka for that Rishon? Because your starting point is wrong. Because you take what modern science tells us as a truth, as a reality, that it must be true. Torah seems to contradict it, and we have a problem because, of course, we believe in Torah. So now we're going to sort of find a mocker, we're going to look for a source that maybe we can fit our preconceived ideas, our assumptions, which are dictated to us by scientific knowledge, and then fit that into Torah by using a source. The Rebbe doesn't work like that. We look at Torah, of course, the majority views not that way, and the Torah says Sheishis Yomim, and that's Kipshuta, and it's 6 days. I've got a question from science, so there's letters and letters of the Rebbe explaining that all, etc., etc. That's not relevant to this discussion. What is relevant is that we need to understand that the beginning foundation is that we take the Seichel Elokei, the godly intellect, as being the absolute truth. And then we have to it's our problem then in our human rational mind to make sure we understand that and to answer any question that we might have, or not answer it and just have a munah that we're wrong. In Basi Legani, Tovshin Lamed Ches, and other places, but this is one of the clearer places where the Rebbe talks about a very interesting thing. He talks about, because sometimes there's, people who sometimes suggest that the science, for example, that the Rambam brings was only true in his time because that's what the knowledge they had, and therefore it's secular science, and it's not really, you don't have to believe it's absolute truth, and so on and so forth. The Rebbe, of course, it rejects that, because the Rebbe has a whole Indian there in that mimer, where that there were certain Gedolei Yisrael who were able to be mavara, they could refine and elevate certain aspects of Chochmas Chitzonius. But the Rebbe explains that once they took those inyanim and put them into Torah, it becomes Torah. And once it's Torah, it's absolute truth. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in Torah. Anything that the Rambam says, if it wasn't true, it wouldn't be in the Rambam. Again, sometimes hard to understand because he got it from the science of the time. But if he elevated it and he included it in the Torah, the Mishnah Torah, you have to make a brach on it when you learn it, because it's part of Torah, and if it's part of Torah, it's absolute truth. And the Rebbe has a lot of things like that. There's the famous letter that the Rebbe wrote to someone explaining, I think the background was a shliach who wrote to the Rebbe saying that one of his Mekarovim, one of his people said that he doesn't think it's true that the Rebbe would ever say that the world is in the center of the universe, and if you would hear, it's a really silly thing to say, and if you would hear that the Rebbe's belief is, a firm belief is that's true, he'll start doing some mitzvahs and so on. So the Rebbe wrote a letter, first of all, saying that yes, it's my firm belief that the world is in the center, and because that's what it says in the Rambam, and that's what it says in Torah. And then at a later letter, the Rebbe explained that really scientifically you actually don't know, through the theory of relativity and so on and so forth, and the Rebbe says science doesn't actually know. But the starting point was, Torah says the world is in the middle, it's in the middle. We have so many scientific opinions that say not like that. We've got to start from the pshitus, from the belief in the Torah's perspective. And the truth is, as we'll come back to, and as we'll talk in the coming weeks, this idea is so important because it has a really big effect on how we live our life. Because sometimes we see a madrega, we see a perspective, whether it's about limudei chol or about self-care, as we spoke about last week, or whatever the case might be, where Torah has a certain view, and modern philosophy or modern teachings or modern literature is trying to sort of convince us in a completely different way and in a very rational and attractive way. And we're sometimes attracted to it and we find it hard to understand what Torah wants from us. We always need to know the starting point has to be Torah. Then how does it fit into the way I live my regular life and how's it going to work? We have to figure that out later. But the starting point is the way Torah dictates and the truth that Torah gives to us. Not only in learning of Torah as we just and perspectives on different hashkafas, but even how we live our life, as we'll discuss in Hashem in some of the coming weeks. Have a wonderful day, everyone.